Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to ISCM's 6th episode of Supply Chain Prism. We welcome everybody, and I would like to thank all the attendees for sparing time and being here for today. Certain ground rules for all the attendees today. This platform is on listen-only mode, and on the right-hand side of the control panel, there is a question tag. You can keep typing and sending us your questions. We would try and take maximum after the session is over. Thanking all the attendees again for being there. Let me go ahead and introduce you to our guest today, Nicky Frank. He is the CEO, South Asia and India at DHL Global Forwarding. Nicky Frank oversees the freight forwarding operations in South Asia sub-regions that comprises of Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. Frank is also responsible for leading and developing the business of India, where he is currently based to achieve short and long-term financial and operations objectives. Prior to his current role, Nicky was head of global business strategy and led for DHL Global Forwarding Certification Program. He was a part of DHL Forwarding Management Board and responsible for key strategic initiative of the same. Nicky has earlier worked with Boston Consulting Group. He holds a master's degree of Maastricht. So welcome, Nicky. Let me also go ahead and introduce you to Dr. Rakesh Singh. Dr. Rakesh Singh is an author, trainer, and consultant in the domain of supply chain and logistics. He is an expertise in the domain of demand planning and forecasting. He has taught in best of B schools from India, Singapore, Dubai, and Europe. I invite Dr. Rakesh Singh also on stage and request him to take the conversation ahead with Nicky on the theme today, navigating turbulence, preparing logistics for emerging challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome, Nicky, and thank you for accepting our proposal to be on this supply chain prism to discuss logistics for emerging challenges and how do you really prepare and navigate turbulence. I think every platform we have been seeing that this is a very pertinent topic to discuss, and the way the world has gone through post-COVID-19, and as the COVID-19 continues, we are seeing different kind of uncertainties that have emerged over a period of time. The world is learning to live with it. With the vaccination I think life seems to be returning back to normal with a lot of uncertainty around new hybrids of COVID-19, but world has picked up. Nicky, you have been in the global forwarding industry. Global supply chains are, arteries of world trade and world economy, and they have been managing difficult times in a brilliant way with players like DHL providing the support to the shippers to reach anywhere at the right time to meet the challenges of global growth as well as global consumption. But come COVID-19, we saw not only the disruption in supplies or demand, but the movement of supply chain, I would call it as, stopped. And that has a very tremendous impact on whether it was road, rail, ocean, air, and huge amount of impact that it has had. And we see that the cargo or the air freight were more severely hit, less severely hit than the travel, but nonetheless, they were hit badly. And as the growth stopped, as the economy stopped, lockdown started, the demand really stopped. We have seen demand declining and rising, but this is a time like the, any pandemic, the demand stops. And when the demand stops, there's a sudden turbulence which has to be managed. And this turbulence, because it has been lengthy one, a year long, as of now, if you see India as in itself, what are the challenges now facing the air freight industry or the global forwarders as we move towards normal? Because I was looking at the International Monetary Fund's analysis of the economy, it says that the advanced economies will grow at around 4.4% from a minus of 4.9, and the developing economies will also move to 6.3 positive growth rate from a minus around the same figure. And even the poorer emerging developing economies will grow at around 4.5% in 2021. They must have made some assumption about the COVID, but I think if we see this upturn and if we believe in the upturn, what are the challenges that faces the global forwarding players and freight forwarders across the globe?
Yeah, thank you, Rakesh, and good afternoon. Pleasure to be with you today, and thanks for having me. You're right with what you pointed out. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has led to unprecedented times in many industries, including the logistics industry. So the initial first couple of days, also for us here in India, have been extremely demanding when the lockdown was announced, when basically overnight supply chains were disrupted, people movements were prohibited, goods movements were not clear. So the first thing that we did was activate our business continuity plan, make sure all our people are safe and healthy, to ensure that they get the protection they need with PPE, masks, etc. And we then, within a span of 2 to 3 days, managed to get, in a way, our license to operate by making use of the essential services declaration for logistics. And we obtained the necessary permits to have a limited number of staff return back to the airports, to the customs houses, to the seaports, etc., to continue clearing customers' cargo and taking care of the shipping needs. Now, this has evolved over time, I think, as things stabilized and got sorted. But nevertheless, as you rightly say, the industry still faces a lot of challenges, and with that, not just the freight forwarders and the logistics players, but obviously also the shippers and the consignees. I would say there's 3 main challenges I see at the moment, and also for the foreseeable future there. The first one is, if I look at the air freight market capacity, right? We still have hardly, very limited amount of passenger flights, and we know that across the world, typically 60 to 70% of cargo moves in belly space on passenger aircrafts, and without that flying metal in the air, there is a significant reduction in available space to move cargo via air freight. Now, that in the initial phases was not as critical, but now, as you rightly mentioned, the economies are back in operation. Companies are producing. The demand that was building up is being satisfied, and there's a lot of movement that requires air freight, and that demand is significantly higher than the available supply that we see within the airline market, and that is leading to extremely high rates and in some cases, not enough capacity available for our customers. So that is one challenge that we foresee. It will continue until passenger travel resumes, and we don't think that this will change completely during the course of this year. It will be a stepwise development where gradually, as people get vaccinated, they gain back the trust, they gain back the security and safety to travel again, and then also more and more flights will resume operations. The second part on the ocean freight is a slightly different situation, I would say. There is a lot of supply in the market, but the demand has outpaced also that supply. So vessels are going at full capacity. There's a lot of rollover of containers in many geographies, and there's especially an imbalance of equipment. So a lot of empty containers are in places where we don't need them right now, and there's a lack of containers, especially in Asia, where currently the production has been ramping up and is at full steam in many countries, but there's just not enough containers to load the cargo to then bring it on the vessels to Europe, to Americas, etc. And that is coupled still with an extremely tight yield management by the ocean carriers that are continuing to manage their capacity in a way to keep the supply limited versus the demand, and hence also in ocean freight, we're seeing dramatically high rates, and we're also expecting this to continue for some time. And then I would say there is a general challenge underlying the whole topic, and that is the uncertainty and volatility. So we do see a lot of insecurity and uncertainty with many of our customers with regards to their supply chain, especially when it comes to the reliability. So one thing is that countries quickly decide to go back into lockdowns or to impose restrictions. So there's uncertainty about the viability to produce or to deliver, and coupled with that comes the uncertainty and unreliability with the capacity. So still, airlines frequently cancel flights if they don't have enough inducement for a flight. If they don't see enough cargo for that flight, they just call it off. Ocean carriers also continue with blank sailings and just cancel vessels, and that leads to further worsening of the equipment situation and the overload of available containers.
Thank you, Nikki. Let us look at one of the major challenges that Trans-Pacific routes faces, which has been the most, facing the most container shortage ever since containerization transformed the shipping and logistics industry. But in the recent times, what we have seen is that while the world economy picks up, we have been seeing that exports have picked up, but the imports have declined as far as India is concerned. And in the process, what we have seen is that a very, very strong shortages of containers all around the place. Not only the containers, the freight rates have increased to almost all the trade lanes. If I take UK, it has doubled from $900 to $1,800. If I take Australia, it has moved from $500 to $1,500. If you look at Singapore, which was just $20, is now $200. Even if you look at UAE, it's increased from $200 to $700. What has been the most important factors that have driven to this kind of uncertainty? Because if the exports picks up from one country, it also needs to pick up from another countries, maybe showing that there is a symbiotic growth of trade, and hence there is a normal balancing of the containers across the globe. But we have been seeing that the carriers have been taking containers with less than full load, and that has also putting pressures on people who are exporting, and that creates a huge problem for the economy and the growth. So what are your take on the causes for this particular twin problems of shortages of carrier and also increase in the freight rates, an unprecedented increase in the freight rates?
Yeah, I think in a way for the ocean freight market, it has been a perfect storm. Right, coming out of the initial lockdowns, which has caused to halting of supply chains, a lot of vessels were halted, a lot of blank sailings. Ships were kept at bay where they were. But once the demand started to pick up again, I think in the initial phase, the carriers were not ready to provide enough vessels and enough containers to satisfy that demand. And while they have by now ramped up a lot of their supply, still there is a big imbalance. As you rightly say, there's a lot of exports going out of India, also of other Asian countries, particularly China, but also Vietnam, Indonesia, etc. And there's a lot of imports going into the US and into parts of Europe. But the production has not yet picked up as dramatically in Europe or in the US. Because there are still a lot more restrictions there, many countries still going back into their second or third lockdowns. So that imbalance leads to the shifting of the available containers. Right? So a lot of containers move from Asia into Europe or into the US, but they don't move back as they typically used to do. That is one problem. The second one is that I think throughout the pandemic, the carriers have shifted the approach how they manage their business. For years, if you would look in the last 5 to 10 years, carriers constantly have expanded their capacity and their supply and have undercut each other with the rates in order to fill their vessels as much as possible, trying to generate economies of scale. Now, with the complete stop of supply chains and vessels moving at the beginning of the pandemic, they have quickly and dramatically changed that and managed their supply in a way that we have not seen this over the last decade, I would say. So carriers nowadays are kind of running behind the curve, I would say. So demand is picking up and is growing, and only gradually supply is increased. So in a way to ensure that the rates do not drop. And with that combination, we have seen this unprecedented level of freight rates. I mean, examples you were citing, we indeed have seen increases of up to 500%. We have seen containers moving from Asia into Europe or into the US that typically on a 40-foot would pre-COVID be around $1,500, $2,000. They have overshot the $10,000 range. And then you have certain specifics in, for example, in countries like the UK, with Brexit coming on top of all of this. This has led to carriers being very reluctant to actually ship to the UK because of complications at customs. They would foresee that they don't get their containers as quickly back as they used to, which again exacerbates the availability of equipment. Hence, they prefer other trades. And in India, we have seen, especially on the import side, a similar phenomenon that carriers prefer to use the available equipment and the available capacity, for example, to export from China to the US or to Europe, because this is a long-haul trade for them, and they typically generate higher revenues and margins there. And hence, they have reduced the available capacity and the available equipment on the intra-Asia movements. So, be that from China into India or from closer countries like Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, etc.
So where do we move from here now? Because what you said is, the compounding of the problem with high rates. Will this not affect the global trade and further accentuate the problem? And if not, what are the ways to tackle this? Even from a perspective of a player like DHL, as to how they have been managing this during the period of such a strong impact, not only in terms of container availability, but also in the freight rates moving up.
Yeah. So let me address two aspects there. The one is what we as DHL have been doing there, and the other what customers and shippers can do. So what we as DHL, how we have been handling that situation is in multiple areas. The one is obviously being one of the largest ocean freight forwarders in the world. We do have very good relationships with our carriers. We do have partnerships with carriers, and we typically can make use of a certain allocation of capacity and equipment that we have contractually negotiated with carriers. So compared to many small freight forwarders, we are probably in an advantageous situation that, like any business in difficult times, you typically look at your larger customers and you look at the constant business. So the carriers have not differed in that. They continue to serve their larger customers in a more reliable and better way than they would do one-off customers or small customers. Secondly, we have looked at innovative approaches to help our customers, and that ranges from chartering our own vessels, something that we are very much used to in air freight, where we charter planes for moving cargo for customers if there is enough capacity or enough demand. We've gone down the same route in ocean freight of chartering entire vessels or part chartering vessels to move hundreds, if not thousands, of containers for our customers on certain trades. Another innovative aspect that we have applied to certain customers and in certain regions is using shippers' owned containers, shippers' owned equipment. So we do have the situation in some countries and with some trades that the carriers do have capacity, but not enough equipment. So we've managed to obtain equipment for our customers, handle that basically separate from the carrier. The customers could stuff the containers, and we've procured the capacity on the vessels, and thereby enabled, to match or to overcome the two difficulties of equipment shortage and capacity shortage. So these are a few things how we've helped our customers to overcome the challenges. What the shippers can do and what we can advise to our customers is we need a lot more planning and foresight. While it was good enough to pick up the phone or send an email in the past to say, I have the need for 5 20 foots for next Monday. Can you please bring them to the factory on Friday so we can stuff them, truck them out and gate them in on Sunday evening? This is no longer good enough. So the carriers currently out of India, typically around 2 to 4 weeks pre-booking time. You need that much lead time to secure the booking with the carriers, to make sure then that there's enough time to get the equipment and bring it to the factories to get the containers stuffed, etc. So this is something that we are highlighting to all our customers to apply more forecasting, more foresight, and have a better planning perspective there than moving short term the cargo.
I think Nikki, you brought out a very good point of forecasting and planning, because my interaction with the whole logistics world has shown that they don't believe in planning. They're very tactical, and they're very, they create nervousness in their business by firefighting everything. I think one element that you rightly say is that your scenario planning, your foresight, your long-term view, and a short-term view of supply synchronization is important in terms of creating a more focused approach towards securing containers and carriers, both in the short and the long run, and allocating them to the most profitable routes and most profitable customers. I think that's a very good point, because my interaction with 3PLs has been disastrous. They don't understand planning. They don't think planning is that important. And I think that's a good takeoff. And in the same light, what I would like to understand from you is that as far as China as a country is concerned, it's been securing container. And the policy of securing container has been, not the old policy, but I think it has been very, very different. How can China manage to secure container when other countries are not able to do so? And I think I've been reading, as an academician, I can only read and talk to friends like you and find out what's happening. So it's a good opportunity for all of us to notice that why China secures and everybody is unable to secure. Everybody faces the same problem.
Yeah, I would see a few explanations for that. Obviously, the size of China and the importance in global trade is unprecedented. I mean, there's no other country that ships so many containers out as China. So I think the whole world has an interest that there's enough capacity or enough containers available in China, because literally every country in the world is importing from there. Now, having said that, also a lot of that trade, be it on the Trans-Pacific or on the into Europe, is a long-haul trade compared to India, which at least towards Europe is kind of a little bit of a shorter journey. So if the carriers look at, in the past, they would regularly reposition empty equipment. I mean, there's always imbalances in exports and imports. Countries have trade deficits or surpluses. So also in the past, there were countries that import more than they export, and the surplus in empty containers, the carriers would either load them on their existing vessels when they have capacity and reposition them, or they would deploy extra vessels to reposition containers. Like we would have seen this typically also from the Middle East, they classically import a lot more than they export. So regularly they have a container surplus and they would reposition this, for example, into India. Now, with the vessel capacity not being available, that's one constraint, that they do not have the empty vessels to send those out to reposition the containers. And secondly, it's then if they have a global shortage of containers, they obviously look at where do I get the highest yield for my container, and that is where I would reposition it to. So it's naturally that a lot of the containers, the empties, also flow back to China and be available there. Secondly, the other aspect to this certainly is also when looking at where are containers manufactured, where are they built, right? So I know there's also the government has started an initiative for the medium term to also become more independent here in India, to build up container manufacturing here, so that we do not depend on imports from China to have enough equipment there. So that is another reason why so kind of fresh containers coming to the market come out of China, or a lot of them at least, and these would then firstly be available in China, because then again, the carriers would not ship the empty container somewhere else when they can use them in China to bring them out.
No, in that light, I have a smaller question to ask you. Do you see a trend moving towards China +1, China +2, or China +10, whatever be it, or to countries like India in terms of the imports are concerned for their basic needs of raw materials? Do you see this trend happening, or still it's a far cry?
I would say definitely the trend is there. A lot of discussion with customers is there, that they are looking at diversifying their supply chain. I think it started actually before the pandemic, primarily driven by the trade disputes between the US and China, when a lot of companies have learned the hard way that tariff regimes, duty regimes can change overnight and make entire supply chains, turn them upside down and make, when it comes to profitability or cost. So a lot of thinking of the company started already back then in 2018, 2019. And while that is there, and some countries, some industries or some companies have started to shift, this is not a short-term development. You cannot overnight change your supply chain and say, I set up my factory in India or in Vietnam or elsewhere. Typically, this is industries are built around ecosystems. You have multiple supplier tiers. You have suppliers to suppliers who then supply to the OEMs. The automotive industry is classical there, but also the technology, mobile phone industry. So I think that is an area where a lot of companies have moved to India over the last years, and we do expect further relocation and movement of building up that industry here in India. But when we, for example, look at some of the critical components like semiconductors and others, while it sounds very appealing to say we should become independent of the supply there from Korea and China, building up a semiconductor industry is extremely costly and requires specific skills and capabilities, and that to do that requires a lot of effort and time.
I think that's true, because there are a lot of professors who say that once you try to change the destination and origin of supply chain, and that to global supply chain, then you need to know if the time of survival is less than the time of recovery, then you can really look at your own country or other bases. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to move out for all economic reasons. So I think, thank you for that particular perspective on semiconductors, because that clearly says that the world has to be very objective and identify things in more objective manner to see what can be diversified in the short run, what can be diversified in the long run, so mid-term, and what may take a long term or may not require a diversification as such. Because firms need economies of scale to have this sourcing done. Otherwise, that would not be a very profitable venture to move to a nearby source. So I think thank you for the perspective. But let me go to the another one where DHL has been doing good work. and that is vaccine distribution across the globe. What are the challenges of a vaccine distribution from a global forward perspective, and also from an overall perspective, and how does one manage this challenge?
Yeah, I think the critical requirements here are expertise. You need to have the trained staff and experts, as well as the facilities to be able to handle temperature controlled cargo. And vaccines in general, pharmaceutical products, life-saving drugs in general are sensitive. I think the COVID-19 vaccines are especially sensitive because the whole world is looking at that, and nobody wants to make even the slightest mistake in that. And secondly, a lot of these products, especially some of these mRNA vaccines like the BioNTech Pfizer or the Moderna that are already approved, are completely new type of vaccines that have never been there before, and there's still not enough data or experience as to their requirements, and hence everybody is extra cautious and provides extra security to the transportation there. The main point, I think, is also ensuring an end-to-end supply chain that ensures the viability of the cold chain and the proper handling of the cargo. Initially there were a lot of discussions and reports about how many thousand flights you would need to cater for 10 or 15 billion doses of vaccines across the whole world. We don't think that, definitely not at the moment, but also going forward, we don't think that this will be a major challenge or bottleneck, because there is enough capacity available. Right now there might not be enough aircrafts flying, but I think we can all assume that if there was vaccine lying around somewhere and waiting for an aircraft, then the airlines would deploy those flights to prioritize vaccine movements over regular cargo, but also they would further continue to repurpose passenger aircraft to fly those vaccines or others. So we don't think that the aircraft capacity is a challenge. It is rather on the last mile distribution. So again, a lot of the movements we have seen so far across the world is predominantly into a lot of the developed markets, a lot of Western markets, and where it has gone to lower or middle income countries, it has primarily gone to their capital regions, where the infrastructure is okay. We have not seen really globally too many movements into Central Africa, into certain parts of Latin America or Asia. This is where the bigger challenges will be going forward to ensure the viability of the supply chain, the cold chain, when moving those vaccines into remote places. And again, here the first or the main leg, the flight from the origin airport to the destination airport is not a problem, but moving the vaccines then out of the airport and bringing it to the people, that will be a challenge. And then the last one, and that has only in a limited way to do with logistics, is actually bringing the vaccine to the patient. So once it is in the medical depot, or once it is in the hospital or in the vaccination center, the logistics in the center to ensure that the people come at the right time and that you have enough personnel to vaccinate people, and then to also do a proper documentation and tracking of that, so you ensure that everybody gets also their second shot where necessary at the right time with the correct vaccine, etc.
That's interesting. But in India, we have never had a need to vaccinate the entire population at one go. We have been saying we are in a land where we have all kind of vaccination, and we have been reaching the last mile in terms of even rural villages which may not be connected with electric refrigerators. But the challenges within India and for India are enormous, because even if you have the vaccines in liquid form, what is important is that qualified refrigerators in the medical facilities across the country is difficult to manage. I think that would lead to a long time phase required for vaccinating the entire population as we shift from the tier 1 cities to tier 2 cities to tier 3 cities to then villages and blocks. That would really see a long, but we even do not have the right cold chains across the country. How do you manage distributing? I know it's going into the local logistics, but how do you manage distributing vaccines as we move ahead to the smaller towns, to the tier 3 and tier 4 towns in countries like India? So there are so many developing countries facing the similar challenges.
Yeah, no, you're hitting an important point there. I mean, I think India, in a way, is in an advantageous position. On the one hand, obviously, being based or being home to the largest vaccine manufacturers in the world, to a lot of contract manufacturers that are already in the production of COVID-19 vaccines for some of the global pharma companies. So there will be, I think, sufficient supply in India, and that is what we've seen in the in the first 2 months there. Also, the government has found, I think, a smart way of ensuring domestic supply while at the same time facilitating exports and supporting the world. That I think that is one advantage. The second is with the immunization program that India has, typically for children and newborns. On the typical vaccines like tuberculosis or measles or others, there's a solid infrastructure with national depots, district or state depots, district depots. I think that there's some 27,000 outlets that are used to handle hundreds of millions of vaccines a year collectively, and that infrastructure can be very well used also for the COVID vaccine. I think looking at other countries, this is not the case, and that's a significantly higher problem. But to your question on the tier 1, 2, 3, 4 cities, etc., I think what we will see, and I think we can start observing that already, is that the rollout will be significantly faster and focused on the major cities and major regions first. So, my initial understanding was that the second phase of the vaccination drive in India of enabling people above 45 with comorbidities and everybody above 60 was originally foreseen for some time in summer, while this has now been activated in the 1st of March already. And the third phase, the general public, the general population above 18, I don't know what the original time plan was, but it was certainly later this year only. There are already, I think, people who are speculating that this will happen very soon as well, because we see that in the major metros, Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, Calcutta, and others, and then also quickly in the tier 2 cities, you on the one hand have the infrastructure to vaccinate the people, and these are also the places that the economy depends largely on. You want to have these places going back to some form of normal, to enable production, to create jobs, to keep the economy going. It might be possibly unfair for a lot of rural parts and villages, but I think the one part is they might not be as exposed to the virus because there's significantly less people movement. I mean, there's no foreign travel or anything there. And their economic importance is not as high for a country as it is in the metros.
I think that's very true, and I think the infection rates in the villages, if you compare to the cities and the metros, have been very low. And we do have the old infrastructure of vaccinating people, but the challenge is vaccinating the entire population for the first time, because we used to vaccinate the children when newborn and things like that. So there are challenges. Plus, there are challenges of cold storage, even maintaining a liquid form of vaccine from both the players, which is between 4 degrees centigrade to 10 degrees centigrade, is going to be challenging because the cold storage infrastructure has not actually developed beyond the Tier 2 cities or Tier 3 cities to some extent. So that's going to be a big challenge, but I think we have enough time to vaccinate population. Maybe the population can come to the cities where there are these facilities, and there has to be various permutation and combination that needs to be created in order to do this. The last question in this prism is on your work area, that's SAARC region, South Asia. I think when I, as a child and as a student of economics, started looking at SAARC, there was a lot of belief that there will be so much of intra-trade in these countries that prosperity will be driven by their own trade. And today, when we look at this intra-trade between the South Asian economies, I think the numbers are so absolutely low that it really raises question about the viability of this regional cooperation between the South Asian countries. What are your experience in terms of handling global supply chain in these regions? Are there enough movements beginning to happen between these regions? Do you see a potential, and what are the major constraints that have that has marked these regions in not becoming a vibrant regions within themselves?
Yeah, I think if I look at our business, it mirrors what you say. So there's a lot more trade from these countries with other parts of the world than it is amongst those countries. I think one reason for that is also certain overlaps in terms of the industries and the sectors that are playing a larger role in those countries. If we just look at garments, apparel, fashion, we have big areas in India, in the hinterland and north, in the hinterland of Chennai, Tuticorin, Coimbatore, those areas where there's a lot of production of garments, of fashion and apparel. And likewise, obviously, Bangladesh is a powerhouse of the fashion and apparel industry. Sri Lanka plays a relevant role there. Pakistan in certain sectors like footwear or sports equipment. So there's in a way a competition there between those industries and countries, and that there's no need for trade amongst the countries on those commodities. Now, having said that, there's obviously others which we also do see as trade movements happening when it comes to machine equipment, vehicles, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, even four-wheelers. So there are certain commodities, certain industries where one of the countries has a stronghold and is a production hub or supply hub, and the other countries fulfill their demand sourcing out of that country. But yeah, I think the potential also from an economic perspective for these countries is much bigger, looking at exports into Europe, into the US, into the Americas, for other Asian countries, and not so much in that subcontinent. I mean, maybe to add to that, we do see opportunities there as well, also to make those countries stronger, not necessarily in the sense of intra-regional trade, but there are opportunities to facilitate the infrastructure or use the infrastructure in a better way. Now, what am I talking about as examples? You could strengthen the road freight corridor, for example, between Bangladesh and the north of India. Bangladesh often suffers from infrastructure challenges, capacity constraints, and if you can provide alternatives by using northern Indian airports or so to move cargo, that can be an option. Likewise, on the ocean side, you obviously have a relatively close proximity there. You can even use what has started now since a while, river barges to move cargo from Bangladesh into Vizag, into Kolkata, or you can obviously look at Colombo Port and Chennai. So there are opportunities to, in a way, cooperate and work together where 2 or 3 of the countries can benefit from by facilitating, leveraging the existing infrastructure.
No, that's so true, because the infrastructure is very important. There's a lot of emphasis on 2 countries to connect to Kolkata and to the airports around Bangladesh, so that facilitate their trade, and also trade. The airport becomes more viable along the east coast, whether it's Chennai, whether it's Pradeep, it's Krishnapatnam or Kolkata. I think that's some kind of infrastructure corridors have to be created there. And any region can only prosper if there is a seamless infrastructure available in these countries. We also have certain regional problems with countries within our own self, like Pakistan, that can be act as a constraint. But I think the potential to really reach the east and become a very strong bloc for the rest of the world is there. Infrastructure is there, reaching world would be easier. My last question to you would be, what would you suggest to the freight forwarders in terms of strategy post-pandemic and post this uncertainty and volatility? What would be the strategy, and how should they really consolidate themselves in order to become competitive?
Yeah, I think consolidation is one factor. I think we have seen throughout that pandemic the advantage of having a certain size and relevance and influence. As I mentioned, whether you look at the license to operate, also to have the right resources and capabilities to be able to ensure a protection of the people, and also ensure that you can resume operations in times like this pandemic and the lockdown. The other part then is, for example, on the partnerships with carriers, be it on the ocean freight side or on the air freight side. Size does matter, and you have advantages if you have a larger size than obviously if you're a small freight forwarder. I think the third aspect, which has accelerated dramatically also during this pandemic, is the digitalization of the trade and the industry. I mean, in many aspects, right? Whether it is people shifting to work from home, schooling being done from home, shopping shifting towards e-commerce and online shopping. This whole pandemic across the entire world, and I think across all industries, has led to a dramatic acceleration of digital initiatives. And that is something that has, I would say, that has started in the logistics trade since a few years. But the last 12 months have brought advancements and accelerations of probably what would have normally happened in 3-4 years. And this is something where, again, if freight forwarders miss the train there, if they do not invest enough into their systems and their capabilities to digitize their business, if they cannot offer their customers the visibility, the transparency, and also the ease of interaction that you can do with digital tools, then I think it will become difficult in the future to compete in that industry.
What do you think will be the role of technology in coming futures? Because one element everybody talks about is technology. I thought I'll take the technology to build the digital twin rather than be the digital twin, because people overemphasize on technology. But it has a very important element in terms of restructuring logistics and global forwarding.
Yeah, absolutely. If I look at the possibilities, they seem endless in logistics to use technology. If you look at the amount of data that is available and that is generated on a daily basis in logistics, this is incredible potential there. Not just for the logistics industry itself. If you think about demand planning, capacity planning, topics like pricing, reliability, others. So there's a lot available already when it comes to capacity and demand planning, forecasting, but also vessel reliability predictions, those things. But there's even more opportunity there. If you think about also macroeconomic implications. I mean, logistics happens typically at the very beginning of the process. whether it is shipping raw materials or shipping components or ultimately shipping finished goods. Typically, all of that happens before the goods are sold and it is visible in the demand. And when you are at that stage and you see the demand is picking up and you are selling more, there has already a time span of several weeks to months before that where logistics is involved. And I think we are, as an economy and as a world, not using that information to the possible extent right now to make better forecasts, better predictions, and also to increase the efficiency of the system. So I think the technology will play a big role in the future. The other part then I think is what we see in our private lives every day. People shop online. They don't even go on a web page. They use the app on their smartphone. People even do large purchases on white goods or electronics. They do that just over their smartphone. So why would further down the line a logistics manager still want to use paper or log into a system on their desktop to manage their logistics needs and their shipments, when everything else they do, from banking to shopping to communication, is done via their smartphone or their tablet? And I think that is something that the logistics industry also needs to prepare for, that there will be a lot of automation and technology in the interaction between the shipper, the logistics player, and the consignee.
I think, what do you think of the future of control tower within this framework? Because you're talking about the three main partners. So what about control tower as a, autonomous planning for global and local supply chains?
Yeah. See, if I look at this, at the industry, freight forwarding, especially from a high level, I think in normal times, under normal circumstances, there's no rocket science. It's a very straightforward business that, with an internet connection and, we used to say with a pack of cigarettes and a phone, you can become a freight forwarder. I think these days it's a proper internet connection and a computer. But the biggest challenges arise when it comes to exceptions, when problems happen. And we know that in the logistics industry, problems happen every day, and that is where you need the expertise and the intervention of a freight forwarder. So I think a lot of maybe it's the 60, 70, 80% of the business can in a way become automated. So imagining a world where the customer asks for a quotation, they accept the quotation and they book a container or an airline pallet, and this automatically flows through the system from a dispatch of a truck to pick up the cargo, from procuring capacity with the carrier or the airline and delivering it on the destination side. But you would still need people either for the special requirements and the exceptional cases, or for really the intervention and exception management if things go wrong. Because that is, I don't think technology can at this stage automate this or take this over on its own.
That's why I think there's a concept of digital twin, where the physical and the digital intertwine itself to create this seamlessness. One cannot do without the other is the way to go forward. Thank you, Nikki. I don't see much questions which are of any relevance, because everything has been taken over by you, so that would be repetitive. It was lovely talking to you, and I think that 3 or 4 good take-home points for all of us. The very first point is that data and analytics will play a big role in streamlining global and local logistics, and I think logistic industry needs to look at their own planning from a very digital twins framework, where they can use technology and physical alignments to create end-to-end visibility, agility, and resilience. And I think it's same as shippers are talking about. Even the 3PL players will have to play a big role. There has to be a lot of good. You made one statement, but I think we've been talking a lot. The process is that there has to be a strategic partnership between the shippers, between freight forwarders and other players, in order to see that the business is transacted in a more aligned manner without creating any nervousness in firefighting. And as far as the global logistics is concerned, I think a view of scenarios that would emerge in the current pandemic is important for planning in the pandemic times, because these are unprecedented times, but we have the data now for a year that shows how things can happen, and using the data, understanding the range of data and the variability, one can plan properly and secure vessels. Third point is a small players will have big headache, whether they are freight forwarders or also smaller, containers, which have been very volatile because of the impact of the first season of the COVID. They were not able to operate effectively, and we lost so much of global trade which was being carried out by them. So I think these are 4 or 5 points that you have brought about well. Thank you for coming on this supply chain prism, and hope you continue supporting ISCM prisms and other activities. And we thank you from. I thank my team here who has facilitated your being here, and I thank all the audience here who have taken time out on a working day, and they have been listening patiently to you. I think we had a very average audience, but then we had a very consistent audience today, and I think that shows that the show was having its impact. So thank you, Nikki.
Thank you for having me, Rakesh. It was my pleasure.
Right. Thanks a lot, and all the best.